welcome to episode 40 of the Monday Night Review. I don't know how to tell you this, but I have another cold. Now, I don't know what is wrong with me, whether I'm just generally imploding from the inside out, but I have had a cold now since the middle of December. I would like it to be noted down that on Friday the 4th of March, I didn't have a cold. Let's maybe make it a holiday. Maybe make it Monday Night Review podcast day, because believe me, I'm pretty sure I don't sound great with a cold. I don't think I'm particularly nice to listen to at the best of times, but with a cold, even worse. But it's episode 40. It's not a long episode, so do bear with me. I will try and cut out as many sniffs as possible. And I hope you're all well. The world seems to be going to hell in a handcart. And I know that lots of people have stopped posting things because they feel like it's too frivolous. But I, for one, know that disappearing into a podcast or an audiobook makes me feel a little less like I'm just clinging to the earth as it spins. So I hope that maybe I can offer the same respite for you, despite the fact that I'm incredibly snotty. Let's get into it. Episode 40. In 1941, the police were called to Hagley Woods, which is part of the Hagley estate in Birmingham, about reports of a woman screaming had come in, and a search is made, but nothing's found, so they put it down to foxes, which it may well have been. If you've ever heard foxes, it does sound like something terrible happening to someone. Or it could have been to do with the case that we're going to talk about today, which is who put Bella in the Witch Elm. On the 18th of April, 1943, 2 years later, 4 local teenage boys are poaching in Hagley Woods when they come across a large witch elm. They think this location is going to be good to search for birds' nests to get some eggs to take home, and one of the boys goes to climb down into the tree trunk to investigate, and he looks down. So one of the boys goes to climb the tree to see if he can find any nests, and as he looks down into the hollow trunk, he thinks he sees the white of some eggs, so he puts his hand in and he pulls it out, and it's actually a skull. He initially thinks it's an animal skull, but realises there's some human hair and I think 2 teeth, and that it's most definitely a human skull. Because the boys are on the land illegally and they're scared of being done for trespassing, they make a pact that they're not going to tell anyone. They put the skull back in the tree and they return home without mentioning the discovery of the skull. But on returning home, the youngest of the boys, who's 17, he feels really uneasy about what he's witnessed, and he decides to tell his parents. As a mother of sons, what a good boy, I'd just like to say. He's probably no longer with us, but what a good boy, telling his mum. The police go and check it out, and when they do, they find it's not just a skull, but it's an almost complete skeleton. And not only that, there's a shoe, a gold wedding ring, and some fragments of clothing. So weirdly, one hand is missing from the skeleton, and the bones for this are found scattered around the outside of the tree, not directly outside the tree, but some distance, some say 13 paces. So that's strange. And the skull still has some tufts of hair and quite a clear dental pattern, despite some of the missing teeth. So they're able to get some basic information from that, obviously very basic as it's the 40s. And the body is then sent for forensic examination to Dr. James Webster. So it's established that it's a female who's been dead for at least 18 months to 2 years, which places the time of death around October 1941. She has irregular shaped teeth and jaw, had given birth to at least one child during her lifetime, And interestingly, Webster discovers a section of taffeta in her mouth, suggesting that she had died from suffocation. So he says that she was wearing a mustard-coloured skirt, a blue and yellow striped cardigan, light blue belt, peach-coloured taffeta underskirt, and blue crepe-soled shoes. Interestingly, there's no coat or handbag with the body, and anyone who has been to Birmingham or the Midlands will know that you don't want to be out and about there in October without a coat. So I think that's kind of weird. It means that they are somewhere. If they, of course, will now never know. Also, obviously, she's wearing a taffeta underskirt. It's going to be impossible to know this, but I'd want to know whether the clothes... that obviously the body is decomposed and it's a skeleton. Is the taffeta, was she basically suffocated with her underskirt, is what I'd want to know. So the size of the tree trunk in which the body is found means she must have been placed there soon after death. Otherwise, rigor mortis would have made it impossible, and it's really unlikely she climbed in there voluntarily. It's determined that she's been killed close to the tree and then her body's been stuffed inside. Again, I wonder if that links to local knowledge, as in someone else who maybe was poaching there or who knew the area knew that there was this hollow trunk of a tree. It seems a bit, or whether it is just luck. It seems funny to rely on luck to conceal a body and you just happen upon a hollow tree trunk, or whether that is just luck and they were prepared to kind of leave the body out there to decompose and hope that nobody found it. So the clothes and jewellery found with the body and the shape of the skull, teeth and fragments of hair meant that they could get together an idea of what the woman would have looked like. She would have been around 5 foot tall with light brown hair and quite distinctive teeth, and as we know, they've been able to say what she would have been wearing. But this is a time of war, so loads of people are missing and displaced, and they have these lists of missing people, but it's impossible to identify her. She doesn't seem to match any of the reported missing persons from the area. Her dental work is sent to dentists all over the country to see if anyone recognises it, and they don't hear back from anyone. And the discovery of a woman's body in such a bizarre place, and the fact that she's a woman, and it captures the public's attention, and the case is called the tree murder riddle for the first 6 months. They've checked the missing persons records. They can't identify her from that. But they can track down her shoes. So her crepe-soled shoes were traced to the Waterfoot Company in Lancashire. And investigators were able to find the owners of all but 6 pairs, which had been sold from a market stall in Dudley, which is a town about 11 miles from Birmingham, about 18 kilometres. So though the police tried to follow up as much as they could to track down the identity of this woman, they don't get anywhere. And obviously with the war going on and other things, public interest wanes and the trail grows cold. But that's not what's kind of so intriguing about this case, because 6 months later, in 1944, a graffiti message appears on a wall in Upper Dean Street in Birmingham, reading, "Who put Bella down the Witch Elm, Hagley Wood." This is first bit of graffiti. There's conflicting information about this. It's hard to track down. There's 2 bits of graffiti that go up very close together. One of them is, "Who put Bella down the Witch Elm, Hagley Wood," and the other one is, "Who put Lubella down the Witch Elm." So I think Lubella comes first, and I think it's not associated with the body of the woman in the tree. It's just seen as this weird graffiti. But then "Who put Bella down the Witch Elm, Hagley Wood" appears in the same handwriting, and suddenly police are like, wait a minute, they've given her a name, so somebody must know something. They have several new leads for tracing the victim. Bella is I guess it's quite a common name now, but it wouldn't have been that common then. And other messages in the same hand appear saying similar things. And this continues into the late 1940s. So it reinvigorates public interest in the case. The police are unable to track down who's writing it. They believe it's too high up for kids to be writing it or for anything like that. They think it's probably someone who is coming in early for the farmers market who's doing it. But they never find out who does it. And in 1970s, similar graffitis sporadically appeared in and around the area. It's all saying who put Bella in the Witch Elm. Sometimes witch is spelt W-Y-C-H, sometimes W-I-T-C-H, but all saying the same thing. Now, obviously, the more recent graffiti is probably people caught up in the excitement and the myth around this case, but I just think it's so intriguing. Whoever did the original graffiti, it seems like they knew who the person was, and they wanted the case to be reopened and investigated, though it could also be the person who did it, because we all know that people who murder people sometimes really like to have the attention on them. So there are loads of possible theories as to who this woman is, how she ended up in the tree. So we're going to go through some of them. So in 1944, a Birmingham sex worker reports to the police that her friend, who's another sex worker called Bella, disappeared about 3 years earlier, making that 1941. Bella often worked on the Hagley Road, and that would be a very interesting link. I've not found very much information about this at all, because obviously in the 40s, sex workers not given the time of day. So if she was Bella, the sex worker, no one would have cared or looked into it. It would explain what she was doing in the area, though it still, I don't think, would explain why she had no coat and no handbag, unless, of course, they were taken and she was robbed. But I find this quite an interesting one, because it's the least glamorous, it's the least exotic, and often that leads to it being the most likely, if you see what I mean. So we don't know how much this was looked into. The police will have no interest in finding a missing sex worker or taking really any interest in the woman who was giving information about her missing friend. I do think there is some weight to it, because the friend, it would have taken a lot for her to go to the police in the first place. The more exotic and exciting theories are a lot to do with spies and spy rings. So one of them is, it comes from an MI5 declassified file about Joseph Jacobs. On the 15th of August 1941, Jacobs becomes the last man to be put to death in the Tower of London. He is an agent. He's parachuted into Cambridgeshire in 1941, but he broke his ankle when landing and was soon arrested by the Home Guard. They find a photo on his person of someone who he says is his lover, who's a German cabaret singer and actress named Clara Burrell. Jacob said that she was being trained as a spy, and that had he made contact, she might have been sent over to England after him. But there's no evidence that she was parachuted into England She is said to have been about 6 foot, while we know that Bella is 5 foot. And in September 2016, it's actually determined that Clara died in Berlin on the 16th of December 1942. So that has since been ruled out. In 1945, anthropologist and archaeologist at University College, Dr. Margaret Murray, proposes quite a radical theory, which is based on witchcraft, because she believes that the severing of one hand is consistent with a ritual called the Hand of Glory, which is what happens after a victim is killed by gypsies during an occult ritual. There had been, they use the term gypsies, travellers, it's unsure exactly who had been in Hagley Woods briefly around the time. So it's believed that either this woman was part of their community or had been taken for a ritual, and that the hand being removed was part of this ritual. So Dr. Murray also says that this murder is somehow connected to another murder, the murder of Charles Walton, who's stabbed and pinned to the ground with his own pitchfork in the nearby village of Lower Quinton, which again she's putting down to witchcraft. It to me sounds like someone who's really bloody ticked off with him. Developing this theory of witchcraft, she says that the plant belladonna and witch hazel are both found in Hagley Woods. They're both associated with witchcraft, and she thinks that, you know, it's deliberate entombment of the body inside a tree rather than it being buried, and that basically she's executed for some crime against a coven. And so this, as you can imagine, is much more exciting than the sex worker story. So this still has a lot of people who believe this is the case, and it was a big favourite theory at the time. But investigators dismiss this theory. They think that the bone from Bella's hand is more likely that it's been scattered by animals, which I agree, it seems more likely. Though it's weird the rest of her was therefore not taken, unless, of course, we don't know whether when she was wedged in the tree, one of her hands was sticking up above her head, in which case I guess that would make it more accessible to animals to take. But I'd have thought animals are not stupid. Once they find a source of food, they will return until that source of food is over. So I mean, I do agree. I think the most likely case is that the hand was taken by animals and then the flesh eaten and the bones left near the body. But I just think it's weird that they didn't take more later on. But, I'm not a professional. I don't know these things. In 1953, another theory surfaced, namely that the victim is a Dutch woman named Clarabella Dronkers, and she's been killed by a German spy ring consisting of a British officer, a Dutchman, and a musical artist, and she's killed for knowing too much. Interesting that the German girlfriend, who it could have been earlier, is Clara, and now this is Clarabella. So available records show nothing to support this theory. But, interestingly, a woman called Anna she calls herself Anna, writes into the Express and Star newspaper after they run a piece on Bella. And in her letter, she says, the affair is closed and involves no witches, black magic, or moonlight rituals. Much as I hate having to use a nom de plume, I think if you would appreciate if you knew me. The only clues I can give you are that the person responsible for the crime died insane in 1942 and the victim was Dutch and arrived in England illegally at around 1941. I have no wish to recall any more. So after many requests, Anna meets with the journalist of the original piece and the police, and she tells of a group of pro-German conspirators who worked together in the munitions factory in Birmingham. And one of them is her ex-husband, Jack. And Jack meets through this conspirator ring a Dutchman called Van Rolt. And she says that Bella is part of this spy ring and had met Van Rolt for a drink at the Littleton Arms, which is a pub in Hagley. And later that night, Van Rolt kills her for some reason, knowing too much. Anyway, Van Rolt kills her, and in the presence of Jack, the ex-husband, and the two men put her in the hollow tree trunk in the woods. It apparently haunted the ex-husband Jack, who ended up being confined to a Staffordshire mental hospital because he had recurring dreams of a woman staring out at him from a tree, and he died in the hospital before the body in the Witch Elm was ever found. So loads of people have said, why did she wait 10 years to come forward? I mean, I don't necessarily think that's a problem. I think you don't know how you're going to be implicated, or your husband, you might want to forget about it. I just don't know how a Dutchman would know about the hollow tree trunk, or maybe Jack said there's a tree we can put her in. It just seems very vague to me, that one. So the case is officially closed in 2009, and the police published the case file. It's then discovered that Bella's bones have disappeared. After Dr. Webster examined the bones in 1943, he sent the remains to a friend at the University of Birmingham for some unofficial tests. We're not sure what those tests are, but from then on, there are no records as to what happened to the remains after that. This has caused some people to speculate that this is further proof of a cover-up at the highest level of the government, and she was a spy, and it was all to do with the war and conspiracy and all of that. But I think it's more likely that the bones were not labelled properly, and rather than going around saying we've got these unlabelled bones and there's been a cock-up, they were maybe just disposed of surreptitiously. It's frustrating because if we had the bones and the hair and things now, we would of course have access to modern DNA practices. So we might be able to find familial DNA or put together more of an idea of the background of Bella, whether she was Dutch or whether she was English or anything like that. It would be so interesting to see using modern technology. In 2018, for the first time, an image of what she might have looked like was released, which I don't know why, it just gives me such joy. I don't know what it was. I just feel like to have your body, your bones lost, to have your body wedged in a tree, in a wood, in the middle of a cold area of Britain, to be hidden and forgotten about, and for nobody to come forward and say that they've missed you or they're missing you, and all of that, for all the publicity of this case, which is so sad. There is something really joyful, I think, about the fact that you can see her face, whether it, we'll never know how close to it is, but a team from Liverpool's John Moore University, headed up by Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who's a specialist in the craniofacial depiction of people from the past. I love a cool niche job. I'd love it if, I don't know how you get into them, but I love it when you hear people who are like, yes, my job is being able to identify dog toenails or something. I'm like, how do you get that specific? Anyway, she has put together with her team an impression of how Bella might have looked when she was alive, which I will put up on the social media. And it just, to finally have that I have this real thing with death where there is a part of your physical existence that you have no participation in and no control over, that I've always found kind of intriguing and fascinating and horrifying. And I remember talking to a funeral director in my makeup and beauty group about, I don't know how we were talking about it, but about what happens to people in funeral homes, and it made me feel so comforted talking to her about the guilt that I'd felt from having my father in a funeral home in between his death and his funeral. It felt really traitorous to me to have someone you love that you just leave in a stranger's care. It felt to me, I totally identify with people wanting to keep that person at home. It felt very, and speaking to this woman, I felt so comforted because she does the job because she loves the job and it means so much to her, and it just made me feel really comforted. And I feel so sorry for Bella because you can find pictures of her skull everywhere. You have people commenting on who she might have been, what she may have been doing, on the cheapness. You hear a lot about how cheap her clothes were. She's found with a gold wedding band and it's said to be rolled gold, super cheap. That's what we hear about. And suddenly someone's put this face and it just seems so much more human. And I don't know, it's something that really strikes me about this case. I also find it really distressing. They say she's had at least one child. I want to know whether if we had her bones now, we'd be able to tell. I'm intrigued. How many would they be able to tell how many babies I'd had? It's distressing to me that somewhere there were these motherless children, or she'd been through the pain of giving birth and losing a child. There's just so much surrounding the discovery of this woman, and I think lots was done to try and track her down. I don't think anybody, I think that the intrigue of the case led people to want to solve it more than a lot of other cases probably. If she'd just been found in a shallow grave or whatever, it wouldn't be the same. The fact of how her body is found meant that lots of people wanted to solve this case. But for me, that just somewhere was there a child thinking their mother was going to come home? Somewhere was there a family missing their mother who just wouldn't know to report her missing? Or do you know what I mean? And I just, that's the bit of this case that I find incredibly fascinating. I think people get really caught up in the espionage and the spy rings and everything, but for me it's the little bits of the case that I find so intriguing. Why did her dental work not show up? But also she'd been to Dudley, she'd been buying shoes in Dudley, so there's a theory that, she parachuted into Hagley Woods and then was killed and wedged in a tree. But she goes to Dudley to buy some shoes first. So, which again leads me back to thinking she was a sex worker. I think she'd had a kid. She was out working. No one's going to miss her. I could go on for hours, but I'll resist. So the graffiti, though, obviously in a different hand, continues to appear. In the 90s, Who Put Bella in the Witch Elm appeared on the 200-year-old obelisk in Hagley Park, near to where her body was found. And the Witch Elm, which served as her coffin for 18 months, still stands. And that's the story of Who Put Bella in the Witch Elm. Possibly, apart from Jack the Ripper, one of Britain's greatest unsolved mysteries. I think it's one that when I've asked for cases that people want me to cover, that's come up quite a few times. I have resisted it because I find it so frustratingly there's not a lot there. This is a reasonably quick episode. I've done a fair amount of research. I've also didn't want to talk too much because of my horrendous cold. But there isn't enough there. There's not a lot of information. What information you do have, it's startlingly different depending on who you read and what you read. Some people have loads of info about the spy stuff that you can't verify anywhere else, and some people barely mention it. So that's what I could find for you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks to everyone who has followed on Patreon. I hope you're loving the little shorts. I'm going to try and get some more up there today. I've got a couple in my back pocket waiting to go up. And thanks to everyone who buys me a coffee. It makes a huge deal, especially as mostly I spend it on books and minstrels, and I need books and minstrels right now as I'm on my 80th cold of the season. And you can find us on Facebook, Instagram at The Monday Night Revue, and you can email in themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your episode requests. What I really want are good, solid ghost stories. Anyone got a good, researchable ghost story? I want to hear it. I hope you are all skipping the cold. And until next week, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.